Yo, what's good? Another Pokemon regional tournament just went down this past weekend, this time in Sacramento, and boy oh boy, this tournament was a doozy to watch. So in today's video, we're going to be covering the top 14 decks that did well at Sacramento, along with 5 rogue decks very so briefly. And also, if you didn't hear, the 2 players that made it to the grand finals in this regional tournament were players who have never played in a Pokemon regional tournament in their life. This was their first ever regional tournament, and they took both first and second place, which is pretty crazy. If you don't know, they did play some other competitive card games, aka Yu-Gi-Oh! Previously for several years, but this was their first time competing at Pokemon at a high level. So huge shout out to those 2, but we're gonna get to them later in the video. One last thing, I'm so sorry, I just gotta get this out there just to give myself a little bit of credibility. Last I checked, I was ranked 29 in Canada. I'm probably bumped down to like 35 or something like that. I'll have my current rank pop up on screen. I'll be attending the Pokemon Toronto Regionals in 2 weeks time, and I'm very excited for that tournament. I want to make you guys proud. I want to get on stream again, but this time clutch up and win. And also, my Pittsburgh regional vlog is coming soon this week, so stay tuned for that. So at the Sacramento Pokemon Regionals, there was 1,427 players in the Master Division. Now this deck came in 144th place. Played by Andrew S. Control players are few and far in between, and playing control at a Pokemon regional tournament is definitely a stressful, tall task. You can expect to make a lot of people upset. Most players aren't prepared to play against any sort of control deck for the most part when it comes to the Pokemon TCG, unless one has been doing really well leading up to the event. So a lot of control players get that sneaky surprise factor going to any kind of event. The whole point of this deck is basically you deck your opponent out and make them run out of ways to attack and switch into their attackers going into you. You have Pokemon like Snorlax that are all about being able to block your opponent from retreating, but then you also have other cards in here too, like Crushing Hammers, Pokemon Catchers, and Misfortune Sisters to really slow down your opponent and get rid of their ways to actually play the game and try and win. So in a 2 out of 3 format, if a player is able to figure out a way to work around that first game loss after learning a thing or two about their opponent's control deck, it can be really painful for the control player. But if the players are not able to have any sort of strategy, then it's just a really hard time to play against control. I actually played against this exact kind of deck at a local Pokemon card tournament, and it is a very stressful game. You have to go into these games with a very different kind of mindset. Coming in 142nd place, we have probably the best way to play Tinglu, because this is the highest placing Tinglu. We have Felipe Santiago with Tinglu, and Koraidon. This deck is also the very first deck I've really seen play Drapion V-Star. This deck is very it's kind of control oriented as well. It's all about shutting down your opponent's abilities with either Tinglu or Path to the Peak. You got Geocomo in here too for some energy discarding. Koraidon's a main attacker in this deck, along with potentially Mew EX, and this deck is kind of an anti-meta deck. Coming in 104th place, we have David N, who played Arceus, Duraludon, Umbreon. Arctum, as a lot of people call it. This style of deck got 2nd place at the North American International Championships most recently, piloted by Ian Robb, and that deck bricked really badly on stream for the finals. Pretty much a deck that is meant to counter the meta. This is a pretty standard looking Arcdum list, and if you are a new player or are, want to have a very good chance at winning games and being an anti-meta pest, Arcdum is a very solid deck to pick up, and with the rise of Lugia, Arcdum actually might see more and more play, at least going into Toronto Regionals, so we'll see what goes down. Coming in at 91st place, we have Steve C. I honestly think Steve was the only player in the entire tournament to play Regigigas. I have not seen Regigigas in a long time. The deck is all about flooding your board with all the different Regis so that you can use Regigigas to accelerate those energies from your discard pile onto your various attackers, which are going to be anti-meta, ready to go. The fact that this list made it to the top 100 is really cool to see, so shout out to Steve. Coming in at 55th place is a deck I really want to try. I've been a huge fan of this deck ever since it's released. I still have it sitting in the deck box, waiting for its moment to be rebuilt and played again, and I will be rebuilding my Hisuian Zoroark deck with this deck list. Brandon Jones, coming in 55th place, played Hisuian Zoroark, and this also might be one of the maybe 4 or 3 Hisuian Zoroark players in the entire tournament, so congratulations to them. This deck is a really solid, decent meta call right now, I gotta say. I really miss playing Hisuian Zoroark. It's a lot of fun to play. You have Klefki in here to ability lock your opponent. You got Gengar in there, so you got some guaranteed damage counters on your bench. You got Spiritomb to slow down your opponent too. This deck list looks really good as well, very strong and consistent. You even have Justified Gloves in here as well to counter those pesky Charizard EXs that are running around to make it more possible to get them with that big 1-hit KO after you move some damage counters over with your Radiant Alakazam, or maybe you used Gapejaw Bog and it was putting damage counters on their Charizard earlier, so you can hit potentially for that 310. This is a deck I will 100% be doing a dedicated deck profile video on, along with some gameplay, so subscribe if you guys want to see that kind of content. And then finally, the last rogue deck to have in our honorable mentions comes in at 49th place. We have Ramon Davila, who played a Lost Box variation, this time featuring Dialga V-Star. Yeah, Dialga V-Star, and also you got Baby Zamazenta in there as well. Since you are playing with Metal Energies, you may as well play with it too. And there was a point in time where I was playing Dialga V-Star for fun because it was a fun deck to play, but you would play with like Rotoms and Magnezone instead. But using the Lost Box engine right here really makes it look a lot more consistent, and I actually really love the way this deck is built too. So this is another deck I'm absolutely going to give a try to. Again, it's time to re-sleeve my Dialga V-Star and have a lot of fun this next week. So if you guys again want to see those fun deck profile videos with gameplay as well, sort of like a tutorial class on the deck, make sure you guys subscribe. I'll be cooking up those with all these fun, or at least most of these fun rogue decks. So now with the honorable mentions out of the way, let's get to the top 14 list from Sacramento. And we're starting at 14 because 1, 14 is my lucky number, and 2, Miraidon made 14th place. So Micah Olton, congratulations on 14th place with Miraidon EX. This looks pretty standard. Got Squawkabilly in there for that early game aggression. Your free retreater in this deck is going to be the Flying Pikachu V. It also has that standard 14 electric energies that we're used to seeing, along with 3 Path to the Peaks and 1 Lost Vacuum as a stadium bump in case you get pathed out yourself, which this card is searchable by Arvin. And some other notable changes about this list that they switched up is they don't have 4 Professor's Researches, they have 3. They also have 3 Ultra Ball instead of 4, which is pretty standard, and 2 Nest Balls instead of 1, 3 Switch Carts, and 1 Rope. Typically, you're going to play 2-2. So, a slightly refreshed version of a pretty standard list of Miraidon EX coming in at 14th place. Coming in 13th place, we have Bo Fleetwood playing Giratina V-Star using the Lost Zone engine. This list looks pretty standard, I gotta say. You got 3 Path to the Peaks in this version of it to really put a dampened mood on those Mew decks out there, along with Miraidon 2, and of course anything that's ability heavy like Gardevoir EX. You got 4 Psychic, 4 Jet Energies, 3 Grass, and 2 Water. So this is a deck that you're probably not going to be getting the Radiant Greninja Moonlight Shuriken off very much, but hey, if you do, it is kind of a nice little bonus. And if you just want to threaten the fact that you are able to do a Moonlight Shuriken if you lost zone one of the water energies or throw it into the discard at some point in the game, your opponent will now know that the Greninja is a live attacker. This list does have 2 copies of Roxanne, 1 copy of Iono, and the rest does look pretty standard. 12th place is a list that was used by a couple other high caliber players at the tournament. It was played by Denny Koo, who got 90th at Sacramento, along with the current world champion Vance Kelly, who came in 31st place at this tournament. And this list was also the list that Grant Shen played to get top 8 in Peoria. And so our 12th place player is Grant Shen, once again, with the exact same list from Peoria, playing Shenpao EX. I already talked about this list in the last, video where it was the top Peoria decks, but it is a max consistency, pretty much max consistency Shenpao deck running back Excalibur, and it is a powerhouse of a deck. Shenpao has been rising in popularity over the last couple of events, last couple of weeks, and I expect to see more and more Shenpao continuing to do well and more players pick it up over these next couple of weeks, whether you're at the I believe Lily regionals in over in Europe, or if you're going to be playing it in Toronto. This deck is in a pretty solid spot in the meta, and is just very strong against a lot of different decks out there. So congratulations again to Grant Shen on another high placing tournament back to back. Coming in at 11th place, we have Corey L playing, of course, another amazing deck. We got Miraidon EX. This version of Miraidon looks very standard in my opinion. You got the 3 copies of Path, you got a Stadium bump in there in Collapse Stadium, 4 Research, 3 Boss, 2 Judge, 2 Iono, and instead of 2 Arvins in this list, you got 1 Arvin, but you do have an extra copy of Nest Ball and then 1 less Ultra Ball. This list is still really strong, really great to play in this current meta. And one thing to note is 2 of the major, there was actually quite a few major Miraidon players that weren't in attendance at the event, which is also why there weren't as many Miraidons at the top of the leaderboards. That includes JW Krewall and Jesse Parker. So I expect to see them playing Miraidon in Toronto most likely. We'll see what variation they come up with. 10th place is a name that is looking really hard to pronounce, so I'll try and I'll read it. We got Irving Xavier Garcia Aldana. quite the name, 4 names, playing Turbo Lost Box. It looks like another pretty standard version of Turbo Lost Box. However, one of the cards that definitely do stick out to me is the Mew EX, which makes a lot of sense in Turbo Lost Box in my opinion. Being able to draw 3 if your hand is empty, or even clone the attacks of your opponent, is really great. It's really cool. I actually used it the other day to copy Dialga V-Star's attack, Star Chronos. You can use it to copy your opponent's Giratina V-Star attack. Like, Mew EX is going to find its way into a lot of decks going forward, I gotta say. 9th place, we have Bryden E. This list looks really cool. It's an Arceus Duraludon with some extra spice in here. It doesn't have another attacker besides Duraludon, so to speak, but you got the Babero engine as your draw engine, along with a Mawile in here. Not just one, you got 2 Mawiles, and of course Radiant Alakazam, and as well as Squovet to empty out your hand so you can refill it again with Babero's ability. So really fun list. The Mawile looks very, very diabolical now that I think about it. If your opponent does run out of switches, they can kind of get really messed up by that. Combine that attack with the likes of Duraludon VMAX, you're swinging 290 on a Pokemon that wasn't able to run away on that previous turn. Coming in at 8th place, we have Dominic Viola playing Lugia V-Star. This version of Lugia V-Star is what I expect to see more of going forward. It is a very strong, versatile version of colorless Lugia. You got a lot of different attackers in here. They're not single strike oriented. We have the Radiant Charizard in here, along with the Luxray, which combines very well with Reversal Energy if you are down on prizes. You got Ditto in here too, that can be cloned into any of your other Pokemon. And then you got Weirdeer, Drapion, Mew EX. I was watching the Uncommon Energy podcast earlier this morning, and they were actually kind of thrown for a whirl with the 3-3 line of Lugias. The Ditto is what people were kind of questioning, and hey, they got top 8. I'm not going to question it. Ditto clearly worked for them, like the way Stormy Mountains worked for me in my Miraidon list. Kudos to them for a fun, creative list of Lugia V-Star colorless. Coming in 7th place is the one of the co-hosts of the Uncommon Energy podcast that we were just talking about, Azul Garcia Griego, coming in 7th place. Azul, another top player in the game, if not one of the best, like, top 5 players right now in modern Pokemon, and he played Lost Box Kyogre. Lost Box Kyogre made it to the top 8, and I don't think this is the only Lost Box Kyogre either. I mean, it makes sense, top player, playing Lost Box Kyogre. This version of Lost Box Kyogre does not have Dragonite or Raikou in it that I've seen a lot of players use. Instead, it has the Zamazenta in here, along with a Pidgeot V and Forest Heal Stone. So those are some notable changes to the list. And I think he changed the list from Raymond Long's winning list just by 1 card. On to 6th place, we have another notable top player that's been doing really well at a lot of events. We got Charlie Kerr. Charlie Kerr also played Lugia V-Star, and I gotta say, Lugia V-Star is just continuing to crush it. Colorless version actually is the main one to look out for. So yeah, if you're gonna play Lugia, play colorless Lugia. It is definitely the stronger build after the Pokemon 151 meta updates. If you want to win tournaments, Lugia V-Star is a really solid list to play. It's also not very stressful to play either, besides the coin flips. And I would highly recommend any version of Lugia. This list does opt for 3 copies of Snorlax, which is very, very strong in the Lost Box matchup. Combine that with the Therapeutic Energy, and you have a Snorlax that's always going to wake up. On to a list we haven't seen in quite a bit, but it's still definitely one of the best decks in the game. We got Gardevoir EX in 5th place, piloted by Ryan Harris. Here's your look at the highest placing Pokemon 151 version of Gardevoir EX. This list looks pretty standard for a Gardevoir EX list. However, one small tech they did include for this version of it was the Spiritomb, because they're not messing around with those Mews. You just want to make Mews' lives miserable, add 1 Spiritomb, and that's all you got to do. Now, if you are thinking about playing Gardevoir EX, just note that the popularity of this deck is starting to dwindle with the rise of Charizard EX on the loose. So the more Charizard does better, the less Gardevoir we're likely to see. So if you're a person like myself who really detests Gardevoir players, we're happy to see the Charizards do well. The funny thing here is both Charizard and Gardevoir decks are weak to Path to the Peak. So if you want to counter both of those decks, maybe consider playing a Pokemon deck that has a Path to the Peak, or at least a bunch of them in your arsenal. On to 4th place, we have Dorian Stotts, who played Lugia Colorless. Yeah, another Lugia list that isn't single strike at the top once again. Lugia Colorless is just absolutely insane right now. I expect to see more and more of them as the weeks go by. This list looks very funky because it only has 2 copies of Lugia V-Stars. So if you prize those 2 Lugia V-Stars, you're in for one heck of a day, or one heck of a game. However, hey, they got 4th place. It worked out for them. They took the risk and they were rewarded with at least several thousands of dollars for getting 4th place, of course. 4 capturing aromas, 4 great balls, 4 ultra balls, and then you have pretty much an attacker for every scenario. On the 3rd place, we have another consistently strong player at back-to-back regional tournaments, Sawyer Melvin. Sawyer got 106th place at the Peoria Regionals with this list of Lost Box, and Sawyer ran back the exact same 60 card list that he did at Peoria at the Sacramento Regionals to get 3rd. And if you wanted to pick up playing Lost Box Kyogre, this would be the probably easier list to run and pilot. And if you've been playing Turbo Lost Box for quite a while, honestly, you might want to switch up to Lost Kyogre. Lost Kyogre is continuing to dominate the field. Like, you can't go wrong with this deck. The only thing you can mess up is, well, your own actions, because this list is good into pretty much everything. Now on to the top 2 players for the Sacramento Regionals. Starting off at 2nd, we got Nicolo Abate. Nicolo. This was Nicolo's first ever Pokemon Regional Tournament, so congratulations on getting 2nd at your first major event. Nicolo played an Arc Pile, as a lot of people would call it. We got Arceus with Slacking V and Gyarados VMAX. Yeah, Gyarados VMAX made Top Cut, and not just Top Cut. They made it to the top 2. Now, a lot of people were curious about why is Gyarados even in this deck, and Nicolo talked about it himself on Twitter. So if you want to see his whole talk about the deck, I'll leave his Twitter link down below, of course. But the main gist of why Gyarados is in here is because it is a really strong Pokemon going up against Charizard. So if you know you're going to a field of a lot of Charizards, Gyarados V has an amazing attack, which instantly gets to knock out pretty much a lot of Pokemon if they hit into it and they don't knock it out in a one-hit KO. And then on top of that, you got Gyarados VMAX, which has the Hyper Beam attack, which discards a Pokemon's energy off of their active Pokemon. So very strong attack, 120 is very strong, and 330 HP is a lot of HP to deal with. That too, along with the ability to use Melanie as a supporter in your deck, is really, really strong. Melanie is just honestly one of the best supporters in the game. Draw 3 cards and attach a water energy from your discard pile onto one of your Pokemon V. So Arceus gets to use it, Slacking gets to use it, and of course Gyarados too. And of course you also got Radiant Greninja in here too for some potential Moonlight Shuriken attacks. And the list is very, very anti-meta, using 4 copies of Path to the Peak, and surprisingly no actual counter stadium, instead just 1 copy of Lost Vacuum. This is one of those decks that was just a very strong, correct meta call play, and Nicolo did really, really well with this deck. So congratulations to Nicolo on 2nd place. And what, I think he got like $7,000 or $8,000 for 2nd for your first ever regionals. Huge W for them. On to our number 1 ranked deck, the deck that won it all at the Sacramento Pokemon TCG Regionals, Alexander Fletos. Alexander played Lugia V-Star colorless, and this list looks absolutely consistent and perfect and beautiful. Great list. This is honestly probably the version of Lugia V-Star you want to play if you're going to start flipping some coins. Lugia's at number 1. If you want to play Lugia, if you want to be a winner, Lugia seems to be the deck to use. Especially if you look at the top rankings of how many Lugias were at the top. Lugia is just in a really good spot right now. Shout out to those Lugia players out there.